Digital cities. This is an issue of architectural design that I guest edited in 2009. And it very much gives you a glimpse of what people were thinking about the future of the city, of the digital city at that time. On the front cover is an image of a project for Istanbul by Zaha Hadid Architects. And indeed, the whole issue starts with an article by Patrick Schumacher based on this particular project that was redeveloping a whole section of Istanbul. And he was introducing for the first time the notion of parametricism, the idea that somehow there would be a universal style for architecture that become all pervasive, that would supersede modernism and other forms of architecture as the new style, as he put it, of the 21st century. The question, of course, is whether this in fact materialized. Uh, what we had actually coming out of the office at the time were a number of different projects. And this was perhaps the first of them, the project that was envisaging how the future of Singapore might look, the first large scale use of Maya to look at the possibility of what a city might look like, an early version, as it were, of the parametric city of the future. Indeed, there are a number of studies that were done in the office looking at the possibility of a kind of large scale urban development based on this principle, the idea that was to be known as the parametric city. This, for example, was a study that was done for Thames Gateway, an area to the east of London, a whole area based a whole section of London, where in fact the London Olympics was eventually to be held, where they looked at the possibility of articulating a vision of the city based on the kind of language of architecture that was coming out from the city, coming out from the office. What would we like to live in this kind of city? I would want to say, but it seems to me that despite this kind of dynamic vision about what it would be like, what a city could look like if it was designed this way, what is interesting is we never got to see anything quite like this. Nothing like this was ever built. There has never been a parametric city. Nothing of the scale of this and nothing of the vision has ever been articulated and actually built in the real world. Nonetheless, we can see here the first concept, the first vision of a radically different an understanding of what a city might look like. There have been other visions of the city of the future that have come out from the same office. This is a project by Zahidid Architects for Soho, the developers in China, of a view of an area of Beijing. Interestingly, also, this was not completed. Having said all that, if there hasn't been a parametric city completed, there has never been something of the scale that was envisioned in that first project I showed you. But at the same time, if we were to assemble all the buildings that came out of the office, and there's been an extraordinary number of buildings, of course, many of the designs have not been completed, but nonetheless, of those that have been completed, there are still some astonishing visions. This is also for Soho. This is a project in Beijing where that has been completed, and you can see from the sheer scale of it that it is something quite extraordinary. And not only that, but we can also see, for example, this is an airport that was designed and constructed by the office Sahadid Architects. It is the largest airport in the world, and the sheer scale of this building is something quite astonishing. What we are seeing then is that effectively we could, if we were to assemble all these buildings together, we would perhaps find ourselves with a digital city. But there has been no single vision so far of such a city. This is another project produced by the Office for Zahadid Architects, I think opened in 2020, with the largest ever atrium created. A truly astonishing building, a truly gigantic building, and all these together create a potential city, but none of them actually, there has been no such single city designed by one particular office. On reflection, perhaps the most far-sighted vision of the city of the future was not that of Patrick Schumacher, but that of Ben Bratton, a philosopher who now teaches at University of College, UC San Diego. And interesting for him, he looked not towards forms but towards informational systems. For Bratton, whose article was called The iPhone City, and this is an image just simply composed of iPhones, Bratton was interested in not the form, as it were, of the city, but the informational systems. At the time, this was written in 2008 and published in 2009, he was observing how the use of the cell phone, of the iPhone, was changing the way in which we use and navigate our cities. And for sure, in a city such as Los Angeles, it is absolutely vital now to be able to use a cell phone in order to navigate your way through the city. Not only do we have to need it in order to go and find a particular address when streets go on for many miles and have street numbers up into the many thousands, you need to have something like to navigate your way in order to find yourself to a particular place. But what Bratton envisaged was the idea somehow the car became the office in some kind of hybrid condition. Now, of course, you can't do that today. It's illegal to be able to text or use your cell phone while you're driving. But it's interesting to speculate about really what has happened since then. Bratton wrote the article 1 year before Uber was first launched. And in many ways, his view was very prescient. When we look at Uber, when we look at what's happening, we begin to sort of glimpse quite different, quite unique way in which computation is changing the way in which we use and navigate the city. It's not changing the form. In other words, if we look at the form of the Uber car, it's exactly the same as an ordinary car because it is an ordinary car. What is changing, however, is the way in which we operate, the way in which we're hailing taxis and so on. This, to my mind, is the way that the city of the future is going to be. It's not going to be based on new forms, on parametric architecture, or any other form of novel designs, or indeed traditional building forms. It's going to be based on a radically different way of using informational systems, of using AI and other techniques in order to operate. That, to my mind, is going to be the city of the future, the informational city, not the parametric city.